The woman standing on that empty platform didn't know the man she'd agreed to marry was already dead. Clara Whitmore clutched worn letters in her trembling hands, scanning faces as the westbound train hissed to a stop in Dustfall Creek. The gentle words she'd memorized promised safety, partnership, a future beyond crushing debt. But when the smoke cleared, only a scarred stranger stepped onto the platform, a gunslinger with cold eyes and a revolver that had ended more lives than she could imagine. He carried news that would shatter everything, and an offer more terrifying than loneliness itself. If you want to see how Clara survives what comes next, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The November wind cut across the platform like a dull blade, and Clara pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 other people waited at Dustfall Creek's single train platform: a merchant hauling feed sacks, an older woman with a carpet bag, and a boy no older than 12 whose eyes kept darting toward the hills as if expecting trouble. Nobody spoke. That was the way of things now in this corner of the territory. You kept your head down, minded your business, and hoped the violence sweeping through neighboring towns wouldn't find you next. Clara's fingers traced the edge of the envelope in her coat pocket for the 100th time that morning. She'd read Thomas Everett's letters so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. His words had been gentle, thoughtful, nothing like the rough men who drank themselves stupid at the Dustfall saloon. He'd written about building a life together, about the farm he'd inherited, about how a partnership could grow into something more if given time and respect. She'd written back with the truth, that her father's death 6 months prior had left her with a collapsing homestead, debts she couldn't pay, and a town full of men who saw a young woman alone as either prey or property. Thomas had responded with an offer of marriage, practical and straightforward. No false promises of romance, just a proposal that made sense for 2 people who needed what the other could provide. The train whistle screamed across the valley, and Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. This was it. In minutes, she'd meet the man whose careful handwriting had given her the first hope she'd felt since burying her father in the hard ground behind the barn. The locomotive's brakes shrieked as it slowed, belching steam across the platform. Clara smoothed her hair with shaking hands, suddenly aware of how worn her dress looked, how the hem was coming loose, how her boots were scuffed beyond any polish's ability to save them. She looked like what she was, a woman barely holding on. 3 passengers stepped down. The older woman was met by a man who looked like her son. The merchant started loading his feed sacks. And then the 3rd passenger descended, and Clara's breath caught in her throat for all the wrong reasons. The man who stepped onto the platform wasn't Thomas Everett. She knew that immediately, instinctively, the way you know when a storm's coming even before the sky goes dark. This man moved like violence contained, each step deliberate, weight balanced, eyes scanning the platform with the kind of awareness that came from expecting trouble at every turn. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that had seen hard miles. A revolver sat on his hip, worn and well-maintained, but it was his face that made Clara's stomach drop. A scar cut from his left temple down through his cheekbone, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. His eyes were the color of winter sky, cold and assessing. Those eyes found her immediately, and Clara felt pinned in place. He walked toward her with purpose, and every instinct screamed at her to run. But her feet wouldn't move. The other passengers had already gone. Even the boy had disappeared into the general store. It was just her and this scarred stranger on an empty platform. "Clara Whitmore?" His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Yes." The word came out smaller than she intended. "Who are you? Where's Thomas?" Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite sympathy, but close enough to make dread coil in Clara's chest. He reached into his coat and she flinched, but what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a letter, creased and stained with what looked like old blood. "Thomas Everett's dead," he said flatly. "Died 3 weeks ago. Fever took him fast." The world tilted. Clara heard the words, understood them individually, but together they didn't make sense. Dead. Thomas was dead. The man she'd been writing to for 6 months, the man who'd offered her a way forward, the man she'd traveled 2 days to meet. Gone. "I don't understand." Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Why are you here? How do you have his letter?" "I was with him at the end." The stranger's jaw worked like the words tasted bad. "He asked me to come. To tell you in person what happened. To make sure you weren't just left waiting. Clara's hand found the platform railing, gripping it hard enough to hurt. That's why you came? To deliver bad news? Partly. He shifted his weight and for the first time looked uncomfortable. Thomas and I went back a ways, owed him some debts. Before he died, he made me promise something. What kind of promise? The stranger's eyes cut away from hers, scanning the empty street beyond the platform. When he looked back, his expression had hardened into something unreadable. He knew you needed the marriage, knew you were in a bad spot with the farm and the debts. Made me swear I'd honor the agreement he made with you. It took Clara several seconds to understand what he was suggesting. When the meaning finally hit, she actually laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. You're not serious. Dead serious. No irony in his tone. I don't even know your name. Silas Kane. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she saw recognition flicker across the station master's face where he stood in the depot doorway. The old man's expression went carefully blank, and he retreated inside quickly. That reaction told Clara everything she needed to know. This man, Silas Kane, was someone people feared. I can't marry you, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. That's insane. Thomas and I had an understanding. We'd been writing for months, but you're a complete stranger. A stranger who clearly has a reputation that makes people nervous. You're right. Silas glanced toward the hills again, that same scanning awareness Clara had noticed when he first stepped off the train. But Thomas was right too. You need protection. You need someone's name attached to yours so the vultures circling your property know there's a cost to taking what you've got. And right now, I'm what's available. Why would you do that? Honor a dead man's promise to marry someone you've never met? Because I owed Thomas my life. Silas's voice went flat. More than once. Because he was a better man than I'll ever be, and keeping my word to him is the least I can do. Because... He stopped, jaw tightening. Because I got him killed. The confession hung in the cold air between them. Clara studied the scarred face, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed close to that revolver, even while talking to an unarmed woman. This was a dangerous man. Everything about him screamed it, but Thomas had trusted him, had asked him to come here, to fulfill the marriage agreement. That had to mean something. What do you mean you got him killed? Clara asked quietly. Not here. Silas glanced around the platform again. Your place far? 3 miles south. But I'm not taking you there until you explain what happened to Thomas. Fair enough. Silas jerked his chin toward a rough bench at the platform's edge. Sit. Clara didn't like being ordered around, but her knees felt unsteady anyway. She sat, clutching Thomas's letters against her chest, like they might protect her from whatever truth was coming. Silas remained standing, one boot propped on the bench, facing the street rather than her, watching for threats even while talking. Thomas and I served together during the territorial conflict 7 years back, Silas began, his voice low and controlled. Infantry company, bad officers, worse orders. I got separated from my unit during a raid pinned down by hostiles, would have died there. Thomas pulled me out. Took a bullet in the shoulder doing it. After the war ended, we went different directions. I took work as a hired gun. Thomas settled down, tried to build something decent. Clara waited, not interrupting. The wind kicked up dust devils in the street beyond the platform. I crossed paths with a gang running protection schemes through the mining territories, Silas continued, led by a man named Elias Crow. Real piece of work. Kills for sport, burns homesteads for fun, runs his outfit like a personal kingdom. I made the mistake of refusing a job with them. Crow doesn't take rejection well. He started hunting me, picking off anyone connected to me to flush me out. Clara's breath caught. Thomas? They found him 3 weeks ago. Burned his farm, everything he'd built. Thomas got out, but he'd breathed too much smoke. Lungs were already weak. Fever set in. I got to him before the end, stayed with him while he... Silas's voice roughened. While he died. He knew about you. Had your letters with him. Made me swear I'd come here, explain what happened, make sure you weren't left hanging, and then he asked me to fulfill the marriage agreement. Said if Crow's men came looking for me, at least you'd have legal protection. A husband's name, even a temporary one, means something in this territory. The full weight of the situation settled over Clara like a suffocating blanket. So you're not really offering marriage. You're offering to make me a target. If this crow is hunting you and I marry you, that puts me directly in his sights. Yes. No sugarcoating it. But you're already in someone's sights, aren't you? That's why you needed Thomas's offer in the first place. Men circling your property, debts coming due, no legal protection. At least this way you've got someone who can actually fight back. He wasn't wrong. Clara had been fielding increasingly aggressive offers from Walter Brennan, who owned the land adjacent to her father's farm. Brennan wanted her property to expand his cattle operation, and he'd made it clear he'd get it one way or another, either through marriage or through foreclosure once her debts came due. 2 weeks ago, he'd shown up at her door after dark with whiskey on his breath and suggestions that made Clara sleep with her father's old rifle propped against her bedroom door. "This is a terrible idea," Clara said, but she could hear the resignation creeping into her own voice. Probably. Silas finally turned to look at her, and something in his scarred face softened just slightly. "But it's the idea available. I'm offering you a marriage in name only. I'll work your land, keep the creditors at bay, make sure Brennan and anyone else knows there's a cost to bothering you. In return, you give me a place to stay until I can figure out how to end things with Crow permanently. After that, if you want an annulment, you'll get it. Clean separation, no strings. And if Crow finds you before then we fight. Simple as that. But at least you won't be fighting alone." Clara looked down at Thomas's letters, her vision blurring. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd been prepared to marry a gentle farmer who wrote poetry in his spare time, a man who promised patience and kindness, not a gunslinger with a price on his head and violence trailing him like a shadow. But Thomas had trusted this man, had used his dying words to send Silas here, to fulfill a promise. That had to count for something. And the brutal truth was that Clara's options had run out. Brennan would make his move soon. The bank would foreclose before winter ended. She was drowning, and Silas Kane, dangerous, scarred, deadly Silas Kane, was offering her a lifeline, however frayed. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yeah, I don't trust you. Smart. If you hurt me, I'll shoot you in your sleep." Silas's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair." Clara stood, her decision made, even though every reasonable part of her brain screamed against it. "There's a minister in town, Reverend Marsh. He'll perform the ceremony." "Now? If we're doing this, we do it today before I change my mind." Clara brushed dust from her skirt with shaking hands. "My farm's falling apart. The barn roof needs repair. I've got 8 chickens, 1 cow who's probably dry by now, and approximately $40 between me and starvation. That's what you're signing up for." "I've had worse accommodations." They walked to the church in silence, Clara 3 steps ahead, Silas trailing behind like a grim shadow. People watched from windows and doorways, their expressions ranging from curious to alarmed. Word would spread fast. Clara Whitmore married to a stranger, and not just any stranger, but the kind of man who wore his gun like it was part of his body. Reverend Marsh answered the church door with a confused smile that died when he saw Silas. "Clara, what's going on? I need you to perform a marriage ceremony, Reverend. Right now." To this man, Marsh looked at Silas like he'd brought a rattlesnake to Sunday service. "Yes." "Clara, perhaps you should think about—" "I've thought plenty." Clara cut him off, her voice harder than she'd intended. "Thomas Everett died. This is Silas Kane. He's honoring Thomas's commitment to me. We need a legal marriage today." Marsh's eyes went wide at the name. "Silas Kane? "Yes," Silas said flatly. "That's Silas Kane. Can you perform the ceremony or not?" The Reverend looked between them, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in. But I'm doing this under protest. And Clara, if you need help, if this is being done under duress—" "It's not." Clara walked past him into the small church, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "It's just the only option left." The ceremony took less than 15 minutes. Marsh spoke the words quickly, stumbling over phrases, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Clara repeated her vows in a voice that didn't shake, even though her hands did. Silas's responses were clipped, military precise. There were no rings, no kiss, just signatures on a certificate that Marsh filled out with a shaking hand. "I'll file this with the county tomorrow," the Reverend said quietly. "Clara, you're always welcome here if Thank you, Reverend. Clara folded the certificate carefully. We need to go. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too normal for a day that had turned Clara's entire life sideways. She led the way to where she'd left her father's old wagon hitched behind the general store. Silas followed silently, tossing a worn pack into the wagon bed before taking the reins without asking. I can drive my own wagon, Clara said. I know, but if someone's watching, better they see me in control from the start. Less likely to test us that way. It was strategic thinking that made Clara's skin crawl, but she couldn't argue with the logic. She climbed up beside him, maintaining as much distance as the narrow bench allowed. Silas snapped the reins, and the horse, patient old ranger who'd been her father's, started the familiar trudge toward home. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road was rutted and rough, cutting through scrubland that had gone brown with winter's approach. In the distance, the mountains rose dark against the sky, their peaks already white with early snow. Clara had always found this landscape beautiful in its harsh way, but today it just felt empty and exposed. Tell me about the farm, Silas said eventually. What needs doing first? Clara appreciated that he was treating this like a business arrangement, not trying to pretend it was anything else. Barn roof's leaking. Lost half my chickens to a fox last month because the coop's falling apart. Fences are down in 3 places, which doesn't matter much since I don't have livestock to keep in, but it makes the place look abandoned. That brings trouble. The well's fine, thank God, and the house is solid enough, but it needs work. My father let things go the last year before he died. He was sick, and I couldn't keep up with everything alone. You got tools? Basic carpentry, hammer, saw, nails, some of my father's old equipment. Materials? Whatever I can salvage from the collapsed sections of fence. Otherwise, no money for supplies. Silas nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon again in that constant watchful pattern. We'll make do. I can hunt. Know which plants are edible this time of year. We'll get the structures sound first, then worry about building back up. We? Clara looked at him directly for the first time since the ceremony. You're really planning to stay? To work the farm? I gave my word. To a dead man. Doesn't make it less binding. Silas's jaw tightened. I don't break promises. Even when they're insane? Especially then. Clara wanted to push back, to challenge the absurdity of a gunslinger playing farmer, but something in Silas's tone made her bite back the words. He believed what he was saying. Whatever debt he felt he owed Thomas, it ran deep enough to bring him here, to tie himself to a failing farm and a woman he didn't know. The farm came into view as they crested the last rise, and Clara felt the familiar mix of love and despair she experienced every time she saw it. Her father had built the main house with his own hands 30 years ago, a simple structure but solid, with a wide porch and good bones. The barn listed slightly to one side, its roof patched with mismatched boards. The chicken coop was a disaster. The fences sagged. The whole place looked like exactly what it was, a dream dying by inches. It's not much, Clara said quietly. It's more than most people have. Silas pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, which is why they'll try to take it. He climbed down and retrieved his pack, then stood surveying the property with that same assessing gaze he'd used on the train platform. Clara watched him take in the collapsed fence, the leaning barn, the overgrown garden plot. She expected judgment, disgust maybe. Instead, his expression remained neutral, calculating. Show me the barn first, he said, then the rest. Clara spent the next hour walking Silas through the property, pointing out what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. He asked practical questions, how deep the well was, where the property lines ran, which neighbors might be friendly or hostile. He didn't waste words, didn't offer false reassurance, just gathered information like he was preparing for a campaign. When they finished the tour, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the scrubland gold and orange. Silas returned to the wagon and pulled out his pack. I'll take the barn, he said. You'll want the house. The barn's not habitable. Half the roof's gone. I've slept in worse, and it's better if someone's out here at night. Harder for anyone to approach without being heard. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right again. Having someone in the barn meant better warning if trouble came. And trouble would come. She believed that absolutely now. There's old blankets in the storage chest on the porch. Take what you need. Silas nodded and headed for the barn without another word. Clara watched him go, this stranger who was now legally her husband, and felt the full surreal weight of the day crash down on her. This morning, she'd been waiting to meet Thomas, full of nervous hope. Now she was married to a scarred gunslinger standing in front of a dying farm, trying to figure out how she'd ended up here. She went inside the house, lit the lamp on the kitchen table, and sat down hard in her father's old chair. Thomas's letters were still in her pocket. She pulled them out, smoothing the pages, reading his careful handwriting by lamplight. He'd seemed kind, patient, the sort of man who would have been a good partner, even if they never loved each other. Instead, she had Silas Kane, a man who expected violence to follow him here, a man who probably didn't know the first thing about farming, a man whose only promise was that he wouldn't break his word to a dead friend. Clara pressed her hands against her eyes, fighting back tears she refused to shed. Crying wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't repair the barn or pay the debts or make this nightmare make sense. She'd made her choice. She'd married Silas Kane. Now she had to live with the consequences. Through the window, she could see lamplight flickering in the barn, Silas settling in, making do with whatever space he'd cleared for himself. Clara wondered if he was as terrified as she was, or if men like him didn't feel fear anymore. If you lived with violence long enough, maybe it just became background noise. She made herself get up and move. Standing still meant thinking, and thinking led nowhere useful. There was cornbread left from this morning, some dried venison, carrots from the garden. She put together 2 plates, practical portions, nothing fancy. Then she steeled herself and carried both plates outside. The barn door was open, and Silas had rigged a space in the corner that still had roof coverage. He'd spread blankets over a pile of hay, set his pack against the wall within arm's reach, and positioned himself so he could see both the door and the house. His gun belt hung on a nail, but Clara noticed how his hand stayed close to it, even while he worked on cleaning his revolver. "Brought food," Clara said from the doorway. Silas looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he controlled it. "You didn't have to do that." "You're working here. That means you eat." She set the plate on an overturned crate near his makeshift bed. "It's not much." "It's more than I expected." He set the gun aside carefully, accepting the plate. "Thank you." Clara nodded and turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Clara." She looked back. Silas was staring at the plate like he wasn't sure what to do with basic kindness. "I meant what I said earlier. Marriage in name only. You're safe from me. I won't—" He stopped, jaw working. "You have my word." "Your word seems to matter to you." "It's about all I've got left that does." Clara studied him in the lamplight. The scar, the hard lines of his face, the tension that never quite left his shoulders. He looked like a man who'd seen too much and survived things that should have killed him. But beneath that, she caught a glimpse of something else. Exhaustion, maybe. Or loneliness so bone deep it had become part of him. "The barn gets cold at night," she said quietly. "There's more blankets if you need them." "I'll manage." "And Silas?" She waited until he looked at her. "I meant what I said, too. You hurt me. I'll shoot you." This time his mouth definitely twitched toward a smile. "I believe you." Clara returned to the house, sat at the table, and ate her dinner in silence. Outside, full dark had fallen, and the November wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the barn, a dangerous man was keeping his word to a ghost. And here in the house, a desperate woman was gambling her survival on trusting him. It was, she thought, as she washed her plate and banked the fire for the night, the most terrifying bet she'd ever made. But it was also the only one available. And tomorrow she'd wake up married to a stranger, with debts still crushing her, a farm still failing, and violence potentially heading her way. Nothing about her situation had actually improved. She'd just traded one form of uncertainty for another, possibly more dangerous version. Clara locked the door, a habit that had become reflexive since her father died, and went to her small bedroom. She didn't undress. Instead, she pulled her father's old rifle from under the bed, checked that it was loaded, and set it within reach. Then she lay down fully clothed on top of the quilt, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept replaying the day, the train platform, Silas's scarred face, the cold efficiency of the wedding ceremony, the matter-of-fact way he'd accepted her threat to kill him. None of it felt real. It felt like a story happening to someone else. But the marriage certificate folded in her pocket was real. The man in the barn was real. The danger he'd warned about was real. Clara closed her eyes and tried to find something like hope in the darkness. She'd survived her father's death, survived the creditors, survived Brennan's increasingly aggressive attention. She'd learned to shoot straight, to work land that fought back, to keep going when every reasonable voice said to quit. If she could survive all that, maybe she could survive Silas Kane too. And maybe, if they were both lucky, she wouldn't have to shoot him after all. The roosters woke her before dawn, and Clara's first confused thought was that she'd overslept. Then the events of yesterday crashed back. The train platform, Thomas's death, the cold efficiency of marrying a stranger, and she sat up so fast her head spun. The rifle was still beside her bed where she'd left it. Through the window, the sky was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue that came before true sunrise. She dressed quickly, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and went to check if Silas was still in the barn or if yesterday had been some kind of fever dream. He was real enough. She found him already up, working on the chicken coop with boards he must have salvaged from the collapsed fence section. He'd stripped down to his shirt despite the cold, sleeves rolled up, and Clara could see more scars running up his forearms. Old knife wounds, maybe. Or worse. He moved with surprising precision, measuring twice before making cuts, fitting pieces together with the patience of someone who'd learned construction through necessity rather than training. "You're up early," Clara said, announcing herself before she got too close. With a man like Silas, surprising him seemed like a good way to get hurt. Habit. He didn't look up from his work. Figured I'd start with what would make the most immediate difference. You lose chickens, you lose eggs, you lose food security. It was practical thinking, the same calculation Clara had made 100 times. But hearing someone else voice it, someone who understood the brutal math of survival, made something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. "There's coffee inside," she offered, "and I can make breakfast once you're at a stopping point. I'll work through. Eat when the coop's secure." Clara watched him for another moment, then went to tend the chickens that remained. The 8 survivors were nervous, clustered together in the damaged coop, and she couldn't blame them. They'd seen their sisters dragged off by predators because the structure that was supposed to protect them had failed. She scattered feed, checked for eggs, only 3 this morning, the hens were stressed, and tried not to think about how exposed everything felt in the pale dawn light. By the time she had breakfast ready, Silas had reinforced the coop's walls and was working on a makeshift door that would actually latch. Clara brought him coffee and cornbread, and this time he stopped long enough to accept both. "This is good work," she said, examining the repairs. "You've done this before. Here and there, you pick things up." He drank the coffee black, hot enough to burn. "Place I stayed few years back, the owner taught me basic carpentry. Figured it was useful knowledge." Clara wanted to ask where that place was, what had happened to the owner, how Silas had ended up moving from construction work to gun work. But his face had that closed-off look that suggested questions wouldn't be welcome. So instead she asked, "What's next?" "Barn roof. Can't have water damage spreading. Then the fences, at least the sections visible from the road. After that..." He stopped mid-sentence, his attention snapping toward the eastern boundary of the property. Clara followed his gaze but saw nothing. "What is it?" "Ryder, coming from town." Silas set down his coffee and moved toward the barn with that same controlled efficiency she'd noticed yesterday. When he emerged, he was wearing his gun belt again. "You're armed for one rider?" "One rider you can see." His eyes never stopped scanning. "Could be more you can't." The tension in his voice made Clara's stomach knot. She went inside and retrieved her father's rifle, checking the load more from habit than necessity. When she came back out, Silas's expression had shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but something close to respect. "Know how to use that?" "Well enough. If shooting starts, get behind something solid and stay low. Don't try to be a hero." Clara bit back a sharp response about not needing instructions on how to protect herself. But Silas was already moving toward the front of the property, positioning himself where he could see the approaching rider clearly while using the corner of the house for cover. Clara stayed on the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. The rider came into view a few minutes later, and Clara's shoulders relaxed fractionally when she recognized him. Marshall Tucker Grimes, Dustfall Creek's part-time lawman who mostly dealt with drunk cowboys and property disputes. He was in his 50s, going soft around the middle, and had never struck Clara as particularly competent, but he was better than some alternatives. "That's the marshal," Clara called to Silas. He's not a threat. Everyone's a threat until proven otherwise. But Silas lowered his hand from his revolver. Grimes reined up at the property line, his eyes moving between Clara and Silas with obvious concern. "Morning, Clara. Heard you got married yesterday." News travels fast. In a town this size. Always does. Grimes shifted in his saddle, his attention settling on Silas. "You'd be Silas Kane." "That's right." "Mind if I ask what brings a man of your reputation to Dustfall Creek? Private business?" Silas's tone made it clear the conversation was over before it started, but Grimes wasn't deterred. "See, that's the thing. Your business has a way of becoming public real quick. I've heard stories about you, Kane, about the kind of trouble that follows you around." "Then you know I don't start it." "But you finish it." Grimes's expression hardened. "Usually with bodies in the street. I got a peaceful town here, and I'd like to keep it that way." Clara stepped forward before the conversation could escalate further. "Marshall, Silas is my husband now. He's helping with the farm. That's all there is to it." "With respect, Clara, I don't think you know what you've gotten yourself into." Grimes's voice softened when he looked at her. "Your father and I were friends. He'd want me looking out for you. And marrying a known gunfighter doesn't strike me as the kind of decision John Whitmore would have approved." The mention of her father made Clara's jaw tighten. "My father's dead, Marshall, and he left me with a failing farm and debts I can't pay. So unless you're here to offer practical help, I'd appreciate you keeping your opinions to yourself." Grimes flinched at her tone but held his ground. "I'm here because Walter Brennan came by the office yesterday, spitting mad. Said you'd gone and married someone else right out from under him." "I was never under Walter Brennan," Clara snapped. "He made an offer. I declined. That should have been the end of it." "Well, it's not. Brennan's got lawyers looking into your father's debts, seeing if there's grounds to force a sale. And now with Kane here," Grimes glanced at Silas again. "Let's just say Brennan's the type to take things personal." "Let him." Silas's voice was flat, final. "He makes a move on this property, he'll find out exactly how personal things can get. That's what I'm trying to prevent." Grimes's frustration was showing now. "Kane, I've got no authority to run you out of town, and legally, you haven't done anything wrong. But I'm asking you, man to man, don't bring your trouble here. We've got families in Dustfall Creek, kids, people just trying to live quiet lives." "That's all I'm trying to do too." "Then why are you wearing that gun like you expect to use it?" Silas's expression didn't change. "Because expecting trouble is how you stay alive long enough to live that quiet life." The two men stared at each other, and Clara could feel the standoff brewing. She moved down from the porch, positioning herself between them deliberately. "Marshall Grimes, I appreciate your concern, but my husband and I are just trying to work this farm and pay down our debts. We're not looking for trouble with anyone, including Brennan. If he has legal issues with the property, he can take them up with the county clerk." Grimes looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, Clara. I'll leave it alone for now. But Kane," he fixed Silas with a hard stare. "First sign of real trouble, first body that drops, I'll be coming for you, legal or not." "I'd expect nothing less." The marshal turned his horse and rode back toward town, his posture radiating disapproval. Clara waited until he was out of sight before turning to Silas. "You didn't have to antagonize him." "Wasn't antagonizing, was being honest." Silas headed back toward the barn. "Your marshal's scared. That makes him unpredictable. Better to know where we stand from the start." "And where's that exactly?" "On our own, which is where I'm used to being anyway." Clara wanted to argue that they needed allies, not enemies, that burning bridges with the law was stupid. But Silas was already back at work on the barn roof, clearly done with the conversation. She watched him climb the ladder with the kind of casual confidence that suggested heights didn't bother him, then went inside to start on the mountain of chores that never seemed to get smaller. The morning passed in tense silence, both of them working separate tasks. Clara tackled the vegetable garden, pulling up the dead plants and turning the soil for spring planting that felt impossibly far away. Her hands blistered through her worn gloves, and her back ached from bending, but the physical labor was better than sitting still with her thoughts. Around noon, she heard hoofbeats again and looked up to see 3 riders approaching from the north. Her stomach dropped when she recognized Walter Brennan's distinctive gray stallion in the lead. The 2 men flanking him were Brennan's ranch hands, James and Cole, both built like bulls and about as smart. Silas appeared beside her so quickly it made Clara jump. She hadn't heard him come down from the roof. "That's Brennan," she said quietly. "The one I mentioned. He owns the property north of here. The one who's been pressuring you to sell." More than pressuring. Clara's hand found the rifle she'd kept nearby all morning. "He's made it clear he expects me to accept his offer one way or another." Silas's expression went cold and focused, the same look she'd seen when Marshal Grimes arrived. But this time there was something else underneath, anger, tightly controlled but definitely there. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, hit the ground." Brennan reined up about 20 feet from where they stood, making a show of surveying the property with exaggerated disappointment. He was in his 40s, running to fat but still powerful, with the kind of entitled confidence that came from always getting what he wanted. His eyes lingered on Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now," Brennan drawled, "heard you went and got yourself hitched, Clara, without even telling your neighbors. That's downright unfriendly." "My marriage is my business, Walter." "Not when it affects property negotiations. It's not." Brennan's gaze shifted to Silas, and his expression soured. "So you're the fool who married damaged goods, Silas Kane, unless I'm mistaken." Clara felt Silas tense beside her, but his voice stayed level. "You're not mistaken. Heard about you. Gunfighter playing farmer." Brennan laughed, and his men echoed him dutifully. "That's rich. You know anything about working land, Kane? Or you just know how to kill people?" "I know how to recognize a threat when I see one." The laughter died. Brennan's face hardened, and he leaned forward in his saddle. "You calling me a threat, boy? If the assessment fits." Silas's hand drifted closer to his revolver, casual but deliberate. "You rode onto my wife's property with 2 hired guns. You've made it clear you want this land, and you're sitting there trying to intimidate us. So yeah, Walter, I'm calling you a threat." "Your wife's property," Brennan spat in the dirt. "That's a joke. John Whitmore died owing half the county, and this place has been circling the drain ever since. I made Clara a fair offer, more than fair, considering what the land's actually worth. She's too stubborn to see sense." "Or maybe she just doesn't want to sell to you," Clara said coldly. Brennan's eyes snapped to her, and Clara saw real malice there. "You think marrying this killer changes anything? All you've done is paint a target on your back. When Kane's past catches up to him, and it will, you'll be right in the crossfire. Then who's going to protect you? Your brand new husband, who'll probably be 6 feet under?" "That's enough." Silas's voice dropped into a register that made even Brennan's hired men shift nervously. "You've said your piece. Now get off our property." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That'd solve all your problems, wouldn't it, Clara? Widow twice over inside a week. Except Kane here's smart enough to know that killing me would bring every lawman in the territory down on his head. So we're at what you might call an impasse." "There's no impasse." Clara stepped forward, and Silas's hand shot out to stop her, but she shook him off. "This is my land, Walter. My father built it, and I'm keeping it. You can file whatever legal complaints you want, but you're not getting this property through intimidation or manipulation. So take your men and leave." Brennan's expression went ugly. "You're making a mistake, girl. A big one. When that banknote comes due and you can't pay, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, and I won't be offering marriage terms anymore. You'll be lucky if I let you stay on as a tenant." "We'll worry about the bank when the time comes." Silas's voice was ice. "Right now, you're trespassing. You got 10 seconds to turn that horse around before I make you." "You threatening me, Kane?" "I'm stating facts. 10 seconds. Starting now." The tension stretched so tight Clara thought it would snap. Brennan's men had their hands near their weapons, and Silas looked like coiled steel ready to spring. For one horrible moment, Clara was certain someone was going to draw, and then blood would soak into the dirt, and everything would spiral completely out of control. Then Brennan laughed, breaking the moment. "Not worth it. Not today, anyway." He gathered his reins, pulling his horse back. "But you remember what I said, Clara. When reality comes knocking, don't expect sympathy. You made your choice. Live with it." He wheeled his stallion around and spurred it hard, his men following. They thundered back north, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they'd disappeared. Clara's legs went shaky, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. The adrenaline that had kept her upright drained away all at once, leaving her hollow and trembling. Silas holstered his gun and crouched beside her. "You all right?" No, but I'm still standing, which counts for something. Clara pressed her hands against her eyes. That's going to happen again, isn't it? He's not giving up. No, he's not. Men like Brennan don't. Silas stood, scanning the horizon again in that habitual way. But now he knows pushing you means going through me. That'll make him more cautious. Or more violent. Maybe. But at least you're not facing it alone anymore. It was such a simple statement, but it hit Clara harder than she expected. For 6 months, she'd been alone, dealing with creditors, with Brennan's increasingly aggressive offers, with the crushing weight of keeping the farm running despite impossible odds. Having someone else here, someone who didn't flinch when confronted with threats, made a difference she hadn't fully understood until this moment. Thank you, she said quietly, for not backing down. Silas's scarred face shifted into something that might have been surprise. That's what I'm here for. Still, thank you. He nodded and went back to work without another word. Clara sat on the steps a while longer, letting her hands stop shaking, then forced herself upright. Sitting around feeling sorry for herself wouldn't fix anything. Work would. Work always did. The afternoon crawled past. Clara repaired harness leather that had cracked from disuse while Silas finished the barn roof. Twice more, riders passed on the main road, and both times Silas stopped working to watch them until they were out of sight. Clara understood the vigilance now. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival instinct honed by experience. By evening, they'd made more progress on the farm than Clara had managed in weeks working alone. The chicken coop was secure. The barn roof no longer leaked. 2 sections of fence were upright again. It wasn't much in the grand scheme, but it was something. Visible progress that made the place look less abandoned. Clara made dinner, venison stew with the last of the vegetables from the root cellar, and this time Silas accepted her invitation to eat at the kitchen table instead of alone in the barn. Place is looking better, he said, working through the stew methodically. Give it a month. We'll have the worst sorted. Assuming we have a month. Clara pushed food around her plate. That banknote Brennan mentioned is real. It's due in 6 weeks. If I can't pay, they can foreclose. How much? $240. Silas's expression didn't change, but Clara saw him calculating. $240 was a fortune for people like them. We'll figure it out. How? We can't make that kind of money working the farm, not in 6 weeks. I've got some savings. Not much, but some. Silas met her eyes across the table. And I can take work if needed. There's always jobs for someone with my skills. You mean gun work? I mean, whatever pays. His voice stayed level. I'm not picky. Clara wanted to argue that there had to be another way, that she didn't want blood money paying her father's debts. But desperation had a way of making ethics flexible, and she was desperate. Let's try selling what we can first. There's old equipment I can part with, some of my mother's things. If that's not enough, then we'll cross that bridge when we reach it. They finished eating in silence. Clara washed the dishes while Silas stepped outside to check the perimeter one last time before dark. When he came back in, his expression was troubled. What is it? Clara asked. Probably nothing. Thought I saw someone watching from the tree line near the north boundary, but when I got closer, no one was there. You think Brennan sent someone to scout us? Maybe. Or I'm jumping at shadows. Silas rubbed the back of his neck, and for the first time since Clara had met him, he looked tired. Been a long few weeks. You should rest. You've been working since before dawn. Need to check the barn one more time first. Make sure everything's secured. Clara watched him head back outside, his vigilance never wavering even when exhaustion was obvious. She wondered when he'd last slept a full night, when he'd last felt safe enough to truly rest. Probably not since Thomas died. Possibly not for years before that. She banked the fire and was preparing for bed when she heard raised voices outside. Clara grabbed the rifle and hurried to the door, her heart hammering. Through the window, she could see Silas at the barn entrance, gun drawn, facing 3 figures that had emerged from the darkness. Clara threw open the door and ran toward the barn, bringing the rifle up. As she got closer, she realized the 3 figures were young, late teens, maybe early 20s. They had their hands raised, unarmed, looking terrified. Please, mister, we're not trouble, the tallest one said, his voice cracking. We just need help. Who are you? Silas's gun never wavered. I'm Danny Foster. These are my brothers, Peter and Sam. We're from Silver Ridge, 2 days north. Our town got hit by raiders 3 days ago. They killed our pa, burned half the buildings. We've been running ever since. Clara lowered her rifle slightly. Raiders? What raiders? Danny's eyes found her, and she saw genuine fear there. They called themselves Crow's Men, said they were looking for someone, a gunfighter. When nobody could tell them where he was, they started burning things, killing people who tried to stop them. Clara's blood went cold. Beside her, Silas's expression had turned to stone. They're heading south, Danny continued, his voice shaking. Following rumors, someone told them a man matching their description was seen getting off the train in Dustfall Creek. They said they'd burn every town between here and the border if they had to. He looked directly at Silas. Are you him? Are you who they're looking for? Silas holstered his gun slowly. When he spoke, his voice was empty of everything except certainty. Yeah, I'm who they're looking for. The silence that followed Danny Foster's question felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Charged, inevitable, destructive. Clara's grip tightened on her rifle as she processed what the boy had just said. Crow's Men, burning towns, following rumors south. The violence Silas had warned about wasn't some distant possibility anymore. It was 2 days behind them and closing fast. How many riders? Silas asked, his voice stripped of emotion. Danny swallowed hard. At least 20 that we saw, maybe more. They rode in at dawn, surrounded the town square before anyone knew what was happening. Their leader, big man with a beard down to his chest, scars all over his hands, he stood in the middle of the street and started calling out your name. Said he knew you'd been through Silver Ridge a few months back. Said anyone who'd helped you would pay the price. I was never in Silver Ridge, Silas said flatly. Doesn't matter. He said you were, and that was enough. Peter, the middle brother, spoke up now, his voice bitter. He picked our pa because pa ran the general store. Said storekeepers always know who comes and goes. When pa said he'd never heard of you, Crow called him a liar and shot him right there in the street. Then they started burning buildings until someone gave them information. Did anyone talk? Clara asked, though she already knew the answer from the boy's presence here. Old widow named Mrs. Chen broke after they torched her boarding house. Sam, the youngest, said quietly. He couldn't have been more than 17. She'd heard rumors about a gunfighter heading toward Dustfall Creek. That's all she knew, just rumors. But it was enough. They rode out heading south, and we ran west to warn anyone we could find. Clara looked at Silas, whose expression had gone completely blank. It was worse than anger, worse than fear. It was the face of a man who'd seen this happen before and knew exactly what came next. You three need food and rest, Clara said, making the decision before thinking it through. Come inside. We'll figure out what to do. Clara, Silas started. They're kids, and they just watched their father die trying to protect a stranger he'd never met. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. We're not turning them away. Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He gestured for the boys to follow Clara toward the house while he stayed behind, scanning the darkness like he expected Crow's riders to materialize from the shadows at any moment. Inside, Clara lit more lamps and set about making food, while the Foster brothers sat at the kitchen table looking shell-shocked. Up close, they were even younger than she'd initially thought. Danny maybe 21, Peter 19, Sam barely old enough to shave. They had their father's death written all over their faces, that raw grief mixed with exhaustion and terror. When did you last eat? Clara asked, pulling out the leftover stew and bread. Yesterday morning, Danny said. We've been riding hard, trying to stay off the main roads. Clara served them without comment, then poured coffee that was probably too strong but would keep them alert. The boys ate like they were starving, which they probably were. She left them to it and stepped back outside where Silas stood near the barn, his attention fixed on the northern horizon. We need to talk about this, Clara said. Nothing to talk about. Crow's coming. Question is when, not if. Then we need to prepare. Warn the town. Get Marshal Grimes involved. Grimes? Silas turned to look at her, and his expression was almost pitying. Clara, your marshal couldn't stop a drunken brawl without help. What do you think he's going to do against 20 armed raiders who burn towns for sport? So what? We just wait for them to show up and kill everyone. There has to be something. There is. Silas cut her off, his voice flat and final. I leave. Tonight. Lead them away from here. Make them chase me somewhere that isn't your farm or your town. Clara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. You're running. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're abandoning the promise you made to Thomas, abandoning this farm, abandoning me. Silas flinched like she'd slapped him. I'm trying to keep you alive. By leaving me alone to face Brennan and the bank and everything else? Clara's voice rose despite her best efforts to control it. You think Crow's men are the only threat? You think once you're gone, everything here just magically gets better? At least you won't be caught in a firefight that gets you killed. Maybe I don't want to be protected like some helpless child. Maybe I'm tired of men deciding what's best for me without asking what I actually want. They stared at each other, the argument crackling between them. Finally, Silas looked away first. What do you want, Clara? I want to fight back. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. I'm tired of being scared, tired of running from every threat that comes along, tired of letting men like Brennan and Crow think they can just take whatever they want because nobody will stop them. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me. Explain it to me like I'm not stupid. Silas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Clara's anger falter. Fighting back means blood, Clara. Means watching people die. Means living with the memory of pulling a trigger and ending someone's life, and that memory doesn't fade. It sits inside you like poison, eating away at whatever decent parts you had left. You think you want that, but you don't. Nobody should want that. Maybe not, Clara said quietly. But if the choice is between that and watching Crow burn this town the way he burned Silver Ridge, watching him kill people because they can't tell him where you are, then yeah, I choose to fight. You don't understand? You're right, I don't. But I'm learning. Clara met his eyes steadily. Those boys in there, they're alive because they ran. How many people died because they stayed? Because they didn't have anywhere to run to, or anyone to protect them? If you leave now, that's what happens to Dustfall Creek. And I'm not running. This is my home. So either you help me defend it, or you get out of my way and let me try on my own. Silas looked at her for a long time, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Finally, he shook his head slowly. You're going to get yourself killed. Probably. But I'll die standing instead of cowering. That's supposed to make it better? It makes it mine. My choice. Not yours, not Brennan's, not Crow's. Mine. A sound from the house drew their attention. Danny Foster had appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain about interrupting. Sorry, but we need to tell you something else. About Crow. They went back inside where all three brothers were standing now, nervous energy keeping them upright despite obvious exhaustion. Danny cleared his throat. Crow's got a reputation in the Northern Territories. People say he's not just violent. He's smart about it, strategic. He doesn't just attack places randomly. What do you mean? Clara asked. He studies his targets first, sends scouts ahead to learn the layout, figure out who's important, where people might hide or fight back from. Then he hits fast and overwhelming, taking out the people most likely to resist before they can organize. Silas's expression had gone calculating. How long between when his scouts arrive and when he attacks? Usually 2 or 3 days. Enough time to gather intelligence, but not enough for people to mount a proper defense. Then we've got maybe a day before his scouts show up, Silas said. Less if they're moving faster than expected. Peter spoke up. There's something else. Crow has a lieutenant, man called Vance. Real piece of work. He's the one who actually does most of the killing while Crow watches. They say Vance likes it. The violence, I mean, gets off on it. Clara felt sick but forced herself to focus. If they're that dangerous, why hasn't anyone stopped them? Where's the territorial law? Spread too thin, Danny said. Territory's too big and Crow moves fast. By the time lawmen show up, he's already gone, moved on to the next target, and nobody wants to be the one to face him directly. The few who tried are dead. We're not lawmen, Sam added quietly. We're just trying to survive. But we thought you should know what's coming, what he does to places. Silas walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Clara could see him thinking, calculating odds, planning moves in a chess game where the stakes were lives. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into something determined and dangerous. All right, he said, we fight, but we do it smart, Not stupid. Clara, you know this area better than anyone. Where are the natural choke points? Places we could force Crow to attack on our terms instead of his? Clara's mind raced. The farm's got good lines of sight in most directions, but the north boundary's vulnerable where the tree line comes close. If they approach from there, we won't see them until they're almost on top of us. Then we cut the trees back, create a buffer zone. What else? There's a dry wash about half a mile east that runs parallel to the main road, deep enough to hide horses and men. Good. We'll need to watch it. Silas looked at the Foster brothers. You three know how to shoot? Pa taught us, Danny said. We're not great, but we can hit what we aim at if it's close enough. Close enough works. Silas started moving, pulling on his coat. Danny, Peter, you're coming with me. We're riding into town tonight, warning Marshal Grimes and anyone else with sense to listen. Sam, you stay here with Clara. Keep watch. Anything moves that isn't us, you fire a warning shot and get inside. Understood? Sam nodded, looking both terrified and determined. Clara wanted to argue about being left behind with the youngest, least experienced person, but she recognized the strategy. Silas was splitting the group to cover more ground and minimize risk if something went wrong in town. What about Brennan? Clara asked. If you're warning the town, he'll find out. Might try to use the chaos to his advantage. Let him try. Silas checked his revolver, the motion automatic. He makes a move. He'll find out what happens to scavengers who pick at wounds while people are bleeding. The two older Foster brothers followed Silas outside, and Clara heard horses being saddled. She turned to Sam, who was doing his best to look braver than he clearly felt. You ever killed anything besides game? She asked. No, ma'am. Then pray you don't have to tonight. But if you do, don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you dead. She handed him her father's old rifle. You know how to work this? Sam checked the action, nodding. Similar to Pa's. Good. I've got another in the bedroom. We'll take turns on watch, 2 hours each. I'll take first shift. The night crawled past with agonizing slowness. Clara stationed herself on the porch, where she could see all approaches to the house, while Sam covered the barn side. The November cold settled in deep, and frost started forming on the fence rails. Every sound made her jump, an owl calling, the wind rattling dead leaves, the distant howl of a coyote. Normal night sounds that suddenly felt threatening. Around midnight, she heard hoofbeats approaching from the south and tensed, bringing up her rifle. But it was Silas returning with Danny and Peter, all three looking grim. Town's in a panic, Silas said, dismounting. Half the people want to run, the other half are barricading themselves in their homes. Grimes is trying to organize some kind of defense, but he's in over his head. Did Brennan show? Clara asked. Oh, he showed. Silas's expression darkened. Tried to convince people that the smart move was to turn me over to Crow. Said if they handed me up, maybe Crow would leave town alone. Clara felt cold fury wash through her. Did anyone listen? Some did, more didn't, but it split the town right down the middle. Now instead of everyone working together, they're fighting amongst themselves about what to do. Silas rubbed his eyes tiredly. Grimes managed to pull together maybe 15 men willing to fight if it comes to it. Not many, but better than nothing. 15 against 20 or more, Peter said quietly. Those aren't good odds. They're the odds we've got. Silas looked at Clara. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to get bad. If you want to leave, take the boys and head west to the next town. I'll understand. Nobody would blame you. I'm staying, Clara said immediately. This is my home. Then we fortify. Silas started moving, his exhaustion apparently forgotten. Danny, Peter, Sam, grab whatever tools you can find. We're digging shooting positions around the house perimeter and reinforcing the barn walls. Clara, inventory every weapon and ammunition source on the property. We need to know exactly what we're working with. They worked through the night, transforming the farm from a homestead into something resembling a defensive position. The boys dug shallow trenches that could provide cover while still allowing clear shooting lanes. Silas reinforced the barn walls with salvaged lumber, creating makeshift barriers that would slow bullets if not stop them. Clara counted weapons. 3 rifles, Silas's revolver, her father's old pistol that sometimes misfired, and a shotgun with 12 shells. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Dawn came gray and cold, and Clara realized she hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Her hands were raw from work, her body ached, but stopping felt impossible. Silas looked worse. his face drawn, the scar standing out livid against pale skin, moving with mechanical efficiency that suggested he was running on pure will. "You need to rest," Clara told him when they crossed paths near the well. "Can't. Too much to do." "You're going to collapse." "I've gone longer without sleep in worse situations." But even as he said it, Silas swayed slightly, catching himself on the well frame. Clara made a decision. "Inside. Now. You're eating and sleeping for at least 2 hours, or you're useless when Crow actually shows up." "Clara, that's an order from your wife. Move." Something flickered in Silas's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant amusement. "You're bossy when you're scared." "I'm bossy all the time. You just haven't noticed yet." Clara steered him toward the house. "Sit." She made eggs and the last of the bread, forcing Silas to eat while she kept watch through the window. The Foster brothers were still working outside, their determination impressive despite obvious exhaustion. Young and stupid enough to think they were invincible, Clara thought. She remembered feeling that way once before her father died and reality crushed all the naive optimism out of her. "When this is over," Silas said quietly, "when Crow's dealt with, assuming we survive, you should leave this place. Go somewhere safer. Start fresh." "This is my home," Clara repeated. "Home's just a place. You can make another one." "Can you?" She looked at him directly. "Have you ever had a place that felt like home? Somewhere you wanted to stay instead of always moving?" Silas was quiet for a long time. "Once. A long time ago. Didn't end well." "What happened?" "I happened." His voice went flat. "I was young, thought I could outrun my past. Settled in a small town, found work at a ranch, started thinking maybe I could be normal. Then someone from my old life showed up looking for revenge, burned the ranch, killed the family I'd been working for, all because I'd been stupid enough to think I deserved a second chance." Clara absorbed this, understanding clicking into place. "That's why you keep moving. Why you don't let yourself get close to anyone. People around me die, Clara. It's a pattern. Thomas died because he knew me. Those people in Silver Ridge died because Crow thought they might know where I was. Now I've brought that same threat here, to your home, and people are going to die because of it. That's not on you. That's on Crow. Is there a difference? If I wasn't here, he wouldn't be coming. If you weren't here, I'd be alone facing Brennan and the bank and probably losing everything anyway." Clara sat down across from him. "You want to take responsibility for the bad that comes from your presence? Fine. But don't ignore the good. Those boys out there are alive because you're helping them. I'm still on my land because you showed up. The town has a chance to defend itself because you warned them. That counts for something." Silas looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. "How are you not terrified right now?" "Who says I'm not? I'm scared out of my mind. But being scared and doing nothing doesn't help anyone. So I'm scared and preparing anyway." "That's not normal." "Nothing about this situation is normal." Clara stood, clearing the plates. "Now sleep. 2 hours. I'll wake you if anything changes." She half expected him to argue, but Silas just nodded and moved to the couch near the fireplace. He was asleep within minutes, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Clara watched him for a moment, this dangerous man who'd crashed into her life and turned everything upside down. He looked younger in sleep, less haunted. The scar was still there, the evidence of violence still written on his body, but the constant tension had eased. She went back outside where the Foster brothers were taking a break, passing a canteen between them. "How's it looking?" Clara asked. "We've got basic coverage," Danny reported. "Not military grade, but better than nothing. If they come from the north or east, we'll have some warning. South and west are more exposed, but the terrain's rough enough that approaching from those directions would slow them down." "And if they come from all sides at once?" The brothers exchanged glances. "Then we're in trouble," Peter said honestly. "Fair enough." Clara studied the horizon, wondering where Crow's scouts were right now. Watching them already? Or still en route? "You three should rest too. I'll keep watch." They didn't argue, collapsing in the barn with the kind of instant unconsciousness that came from being young and pushed past normal limits. Clara walked the property perimeter, checking sight lines, making mental notes of every cover position. She'd never been in a real fight before, had never shot at anything except game animals and practiced targets. The idea of pointing a rifle at another human being and pulling the trigger made her stomach turn. But the alternative, standing by while people died, losing her home without fighting for it, that was worse. She was near the northern tree line when movement caught her eye. Clara froze, bringing up her rifle, but whatever she'd seen was gone. A deer, maybe, or her exhausted mind playing tricks. She waited, barely breathing, scanning the shadows between the trees. Then she saw it again. Definitely human, darting from one trunk to another, not trying to approach, just observing. Scouting. Clara fired a shot into the air, the crack of the rifle splitting the morning quiet. Immediately she heard shouts from the house and barn as everyone jerked awake. The figure in the trees vanished completely, and Clara heard hoofbeats retreating fast. Silas reached her first, gun drawn, hair disheveled from sleep. What happened? Scout. In the trees, watching us. Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I fired to scare them off. Did you see how many? Just one that I could spot. But there could be more. Silas's expression went grim. Then they know we're ready. That might make them more cautious, or it might make them hit us harder and faster to prevent us from organizing further. He looked back toward the house. Either way, the clock just started. We've got maybe 12 hours before they attack. Probably less. The Foster brothers had emerged from the barn, weapons in hand, looking around wildly. Clara called out, "False alarm! Scout in the trees! They're gone now!" For now, Danny said quietly. The rest of the morning was controlled chaos. Silas sent Danny into town to warn Marshal Grimes that Crow's scouts had been spotted and to bring back anyone willing to help defend the farm. Peter and Sam reinforced the shooting positions they'd dug, adding more cover and clearing better sight lines. Clara prepared everything they'd need if they ended up pinned down: water, food, medical supplies, extra ammunition distributed to multiple locations so running out in one spot didn't mean total failure. Around noon, Danny returned with Marshal Grimes and 12 men from town. Not the 15 Grimes had mentioned, and Clara's heart sank at what that meant. 3 had changed their minds, fear winning out over solidarity. The men who'd come looked terrified but determined, carrying rifles and shotguns that ranged from well-maintained to barely functional. "This is insane," Grimes said without preamble. "We should be evacuating, not fortifying." "Evacuate where?" Silas countered. "Crows coming from the north, towns to the west. We'd be running right toward them or exposing everyone on open road. At least here we've got defensive positions and some warning if they approach." "You're using Clara's farm as a killing ground." "I'm using it as a place we might actually survive." Silas gestured to the property. "Look at it, Marshal. Good sight lines, multiple covered positions, water supply, limited approaches. It's not perfect, but it's better than being caught in town where there's civilians everywhere and no coherent defense." Grimes looked like he wanted to argue further but couldn't find solid ground to stand on. "Fine. But when this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, that's on you." "I'll live with it," Silas said flatly. "If I live at all." He organized the men from town with military efficiency, assigning positions based on who was the best shot versus who was just warm bodies with guns. The better shooters got the elevated positions, the barn loft, the house's second-floor windows. Everyone else spread around the perimeter with instructions to hold fire until Silas gave the signal. "What's the signal?" one of the townsmen asked nervously. "Me shooting," Silas said. "Don't fire before I do. We need them close enough that every shot counts. Ammunition's limited, and if we start shooting too early, we'll just waste bullets and show them where we're positioned." Clara ended up assigned to the house's second floor with Peter Foster, both of them stationed at windows facing north and east. From up here, she could see the entire approach, the defensive positions Silas had set up, the nervous men crouching behind hastily erected barriers. It looked so fragile, like children playing war. "You ever been in a real fight?" Peter asked quietly. "No? You?" "No." He checked his rifle's load for the 10th time. "I'm scared." "Me too." "You don't look it." "That's just my face." Clara managed a weak smile. "Inside, I'm terrified." They waited as the afternoon stretched into evening. Silas moved between positions, checking on people, offering quiet encouragement or tactical advice. He'd shifted into what Clara recognized as his military mode: focused, controlled, the emotional distance necessary to send people into danger. She wondered how many times he'd done this before, how many fights he'd barely survived. Dusk fell, and with it came a thick fog that rolled in from the north, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet. Clara heard Silas cursing from below, recognizing the tactical nightmare this presented. They couldn't see approaching threats until they were almost on top of the farm. "Light every lamp we've got," Silas called out. "Make the house and barn as visible as possible. If we can't see out, at least we'll be hard to approach without being silhouetted." They lit lamps and built up the fires, creating islands of light in the murk. It felt exposing and vulnerable, but Silas was right. Anyone approaching through that fog would have to cross through illuminated ground to reach them. The attack came an hour after full dark, and it came exactly the way Danny had warned, fast and overwhelming. One moment there was just fog and silence. The next, gunfire erupted from multiple directions at once, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Clara heard men screaming, the thunder of hoofbeats, the crash of wood splintering as bullets tore through their makeshift barriers. "Hold!" Silas's voice cut through the chaos. "Wait for clear shots." Clara forced herself to breathe, to focus, to pick a target among the shapes moving through the fog. She saw a rider burst through, heading straight for the house, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the rider jerked but didn't fall. She fired again, and this time he tumbled from the saddle. She'd just killed someone. The thought tried to paralyze her, but there was no time. More riders were coming, and beside her, Peter was firing steadily, his earlier fear transformed into mechanical focus. Clara reloaded, fired, fell into a rhythm that pushed everything else aside except the immediate need to stop the men trying to kill them. Below, Silas was moving between positions with deadly efficiency, his revolver barking regularly. Clara saw him drop 2 attackers in quick succession, then roll behind cover as return fire chewed up the ground where he'd been standing. One of the townsmen, she couldn't tell who in the chaos, went down screaming, clutching his leg. Another dragged him behind cover while maintaining fire. The barn caught fire, flames leaping up the dry wood despite the fog's dampness. The light it created was both advantage and threat, illuminating the attackers but also destroying one of their defensive positions. She saw Sam Foster running from the barn, his clothes smoking, firing wildly at shapes in the darkness. Then Clara saw him, the man who had to be Elias Crow. He sat his horse at the edge of the fog bank, not participating directly but watching everything with cold assessment. Even at this distance, Clara could see the beard Danny had described, the way he commanded the chaos without seeming to move. And beside him, another figure, Vance probably, who was definitely participating, firing methodically at anything that moved. "Silas!" Clara screamed. "Crows on the north side, at the tree line!" She saw Silas's head snap up, saw him locate the target, saw calculation flash across his face. Then he was moving, sprinting toward the burning barn in a pattern that seemed suicidal until Clara understood. He was using the fire as cover, letting it mask his approach while drawing fire toward himself and away from the townsmen. "What's he doing?" Peter gasped. "Something incredibly stupid," Clara whispered. Silas reached the barn's far side and used the burning structure as a screen, working his way around until he had a clear angle on Crow's position. Clara held her breath, willing him to take the shot, to end this before more people died. But before Silas could fire, the barn's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flaming debris. The sudden surge of light exposed his position, and immediately 6 guns turned his direction. Clara watched in horror as Silas dove for cover, bullets kicking up dirt all around him, one catching his shoulder and spinning him sideways. "No!" Clara was moving before conscious thought, running down the stairs, ignoring Peter's shout behind her. She burst out the front door into chaos, men fighting, dying, the smell of blood and smoke and gunpowder thick enough to choke on. She ran toward where Silas had fallen, firing her rifle at anything that moved to give him covering fire. She reached him behind an overturned water trough, and relief flooded through her when she saw he was still conscious, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. "You're hit." I noticed. His voice was strained but steady. "What are you doing out here?" "Saving your stupid life. Can you shoot?" "With my left hand?" "Not accurately." Clara grabbed his revolver from where it had fallen, checking the load. 3 rounds left. She looked over the trough, seeing Crow still mounted at the tree line watching his men swarm the farm. Vance was closer now, maybe 40 feet away, moving systematically toward their position. "I can't make that shot," Clara said, measuring the distance. "Then we hold here until someone can." Silas tried to rise, gasped at the pain, settled back down. How bad is the rest of the defense? Barnes gone, maybe 3 men down that I could see, but we're still holding. As if to punctuate her words, a massive volley of fire erupted from the house and remaining positions, and Clara saw several attackers fall. The assault was breaking, the raiders pulling back toward the tree line. They'd hit hard and fast, but the defense had held just barely. Now both sides were reassessing, regrouping, trying to determine if continuing the fight was worth the cost. Crow raised his hand, and his remaining men, Clara counted maybe 12 still upright, began an organized withdrawal. They weren't running, just falling back to regroup. Vance was the last to leave, emptying his pistol toward the house in a final act of violence before wheeling his horse around and disappearing into the fog. The silence after the gunfire stopped was almost worse than the noise had been. Clara could hear wounded men groaning, fire crackling in the barn's remains, her own harsh breathing. She looked down at Silas, whose face had gone gray with pain but whose eyes were still sharp, still assessing. "We won," she said, trying to believe it. "No, we survived the first round." Silas gestured weakly toward the north. "Crow's not done. He's just decided he needs a different approach." "What do you mean?" "He expected to roll over us quick. When that didn't work, he pulled back. Now he knows our strength, our positions, where we're vulnerable. Next time he comes, it'll be worse." Clara wanted to argue that they'd proven they could defend themselves, that Crow might decide the farm wasn't worth the cost. But looking at Silas's expression, she knew that was wishful thinking. Men like Crow didn't walk away from a fight. They escalated until they won or died trying. Marshal Grimes appeared through the smoke, his face blackened with powder, bleeding from a gash across his cheek. 3 dead, 5 wounded serious. "We can't hold if they come again with the same numbers." "Then we need reinforcements," Clara said. "Send riders to the neighboring towns, bring back anyone willing to help." "That'll take days." "We don't have days." "Then we make the time." Clara stood, her decision made. Fortify what we can, tend the wounded, and prepare for round 2. Because Silas is right, they're coming back. And next time, we need to be ready to end this permanently. Grimes left to organize what remained of their defense while Clara helped Silas back toward the house, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and sticky against her hand, and she forced down the panic rising in her throat. She'd seen her father die slowly from illness, watched him fade over months until there was nothing left. But this was different, sudden, violent, the kind of injury that could kill in hours if not treated properly. Inside, the kitchen had been transformed into a makeshift hospital. 2 of the townsmen lay on the floor, one unconscious, the other biting down on a leather strap, while Danny Foster tried to dig a bullet out of his thigh. The 3rd dead man had been carried to the barn's remains, covered with a blanket that was already soaking through. Clara didn't recognize him in the darkness, wasn't sure she wanted to. "Sit," she ordered Silas, pushing him into a chair. She grabbed the medical supplies she'd prepared earlier, clean cloth, whiskey for disinfecting, a knife she'd sterilized over flame. Her hands shook as she cut away his shirt, exposing the wound in his shoulder. The bullet had gone through, which was good, nothing to dig out. But it had torn muscle and was bleeding steadily. "You know what you're doing?" Silas asked through gritted teeth. "Not even a little bit." Clara poured whiskey over the wound, and Silas's whole body went rigid, a hiss escaping between his teeth. "But I've stitched up horses in my father's hand that one time he caught it in the thresher. Can't be that different." "It's very different." "Then you should have married someone with medical training." Clara threaded the needle, her vision blurring from exhaustion and stress. She blinked hard, forcing focus. "This is going to hurt." "Already hurts." She started stitching, trying to keep her hand steady, trying to ignore how Silas's breathing went shallow and harsh with each pull of thread through torn flesh. He didn't cry out, didn't curse, just sat there taking it with the kind of stillness that came from experience with pain, that somehow made it worse. "How many times have you been shot?" Clara asked, partly to distract herself, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "Including this one?" 7. Silas's voice was strained but steady. "Twice in the leg, once in the side, once grazed my head close enough to scar, once through the arm, and twice in the shoulder. This shoulder was already hit before. Guess it's a popular target." "Or you're terrible at dodging." That pulled a ghost of a smile from him. "That too." Clara finished the front wound and moved to the exit hole and back, which was messier, the flesh more torn. Silas leaned forward to give her access, and she saw more scars across his back, old knife wounds, maybe burns, the accumulated damage of a violent life. Her stomach twisted, thinking about what each mark represented, what pain he'd endured to earn them. "Why do you do it?" she asked quietly, focusing on her stitching. "Live like this. Fight like this. You could have walked away from Crow, started over somewhere else under a different name. Tried that, didn't work." Silas was quiet for a moment. "And walking away from Crow means leaving him free to do this to other people, to other towns. At some point, someone has to stand up and say enough. That someone doesn't have to be you. Who else is going to do it? Marshal Grimes? Those townsmen who could barely hold a rifle straight?" Silas shook his head slightly, then winced at the movement. "This is what I'm good at, Clara. Violence, fighting. It's the only thing I know how to do that actually makes a difference. So, yeah, I could walk away, but then I'd just be the man who let innocent people die because I was too much of a coward to stand and fight." Clara tied off the final stitch and wrapped clean cloth around his shoulder, binding it tight to slow the bleeding. "You're not a coward. You're possibly the bravest person I've ever met, but you're also possibly the most stubborn and stupidly self-destructive. Takes one to know one." Silas caught her hand as she reached for more bandages, his grip surprisingly strong despite the blood loss. "What you did out there, running into a firefight to help me, that was stupidly brave too. Don't pretend you're any more sensible than I am." "I never claimed to be sensible. Sensible people don't marry gunfighters they just met." "Fair point." They sat there for a moment, Clara's hand still caught in his, both of them bruised and bloody and exhausted beyond measure. Outside, she could hear the murmur of wounded men, the crackle of the barn's dying fire, Marshal Grimes barking orders as people tried to shore up their damaged defenses. The fog was lifting, which meant better visibility, but also meant Crow could see their weakened state clearly. "We can't win this," Clara said quietly, voicing the fear she'd been pushing down. "Can we? Not if he comes back with the same numbers." "Probably not. Not straight up." Silas leaned back carefully, exhaustion written across his face. "But we don't need to win. We just need to hurt him bad enough that the cost outweighs the prize." "How do we do that?" "We change the game. Stop reacting to his moves and make him react to ours." Silas's eyes sharpened despite his obvious pain. Crow's strength is numbers and brutality. He overwhelms defenses with pure force, but that requires keeping his men motivated and loyalty based on fear breaks fast when the cost gets too high. Clara tried to follow his logic. "You want to break his command structure, go after Crow directly. And Vance, take them both out, the rest scatter. Mercenaries and raiders don't stick around when the money dries up and the leadership's dead." "That's a huge if. How do we even get close to them? They're not going to ride up and let us shoot them." "No, but they'll come to us if we give them the right bait." Silas met her eyes. "Me. I'm what Crow wants. So I give myself to him, or make him think I have. And when he gets close, we spring the trap." Clara's blood went cold. "Absolutely not. That's suicide. It's strategy. It's you dying to save everyone else, which you seem disturbingly comfortable with." Clara stood, anger flooding through her exhaustion. "No, we find another way." "There is no other way. Clara, look at our situation. We've got maybe 9 healthy fighters left, limited ammunition, and Crow is probably already sent for reinforcements. By tomorrow, he could have 30 men out there. We can't defend against that. But we can end this if we're smart about it." "Smart about it still means you getting killed." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm faster than Crow thinks." Silas tried to stand, swayed, and Clara pushed him back down. "I've been in worse situations." "Name one." He thought about it, then grimaced. "Can't immediately, but I'm sure there was something." "That's not reassuring." Clara paced the kitchen, her mind racing through options that all ended the same way, with Silas dead and Crow victorious, or everyone dead and Crow victorious, or some variation where the only winner was violence itself. There had to be another path, something that didn't require sacrificing the man who'd kept his word to a ghost and shown up to fight beside her. Marshal Grimes appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "We've got a problem. Just did a count of ammunition. Between all of us, we've maybe got 100 rounds left, maybe less. That's not enough for another sustained fight. Then we don't have a sustained fight, Silas said. We end it fast, one way or another. And how exactly do we do that? Silas explained his plan, using himself as bait to draw Crow close, then having the remaining fighters hit from multiple angles in a coordinated strike. Grimes listened, his expression growing more horrified with each detail. That's insane, the marshal said flatly. You're gambling everything on Crow taking the bait and not just shooting you on sight. He won't. He wants me to suffer first. That's why he's been burning towns and killing people. To make me watch, to make me feel responsible. He'll want to do it slow, make a show of it. That buys us time. Time for what? For him to kill you anyway? Time for you to get in position and take the shot. Silas's voice hardened. This isn't a debate, Marshal. This is what's happening. The only question is whether you help or get in the way. Grimes looked at Clara, clearly hoping she'd talk sense into Silas. But Clara had already seen the calculation in Silas's eyes, the resigned determination of someone who'd accepted this outcome long before the conversation started. He'd been prepared to die from the moment he stepped off that train in Dustfall Creek, maybe from long before that. And nothing she said was going to change his mind. If we're doing this, Claire said quietly, then we do it right. Full plan, contingencies, backup options, and I'm part of it. Clara, I'm part of it, she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. You want to use yourself as bait? Fine, but you don't get to cut me out of the fight. This is my home, my stand. So either we plan this together, or I'll walk out there right now and shoot Crow myself. Silas looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. All right, together. They spent the next 2 hours planning, arguing, revising, trying to account for every variable, and knowing they couldn't. The surviving Foster brothers contributed ideas, their youth lending a different perspective that sometimes cut through the darker calculations. Grimes remained skeptical, but ultimately committed, recognizing that waiting for reinforcements that might never come wasn't a viable strategy. The plan was simple, which meant it probably wouldn't work. Silas would ride out at dawn with a white flag, offering himself in exchange for Crow, leaving the town and farm alone. While Crow's attention was focused on Silas, their best shooters, Clara included, would position themselves in the remaining tree line with clear sight lines. When Crow got close enough to Silas, they'd take the shot, hit Crow and Vance simultaneously if possible, then use the chaos to eliminate as many other raiders as they could before the rest scattered. It was full of holes, required perfect timing, accurate shooting under pressure, and Crow behaving exactly as predicted. But it was the best option available, which said more about their desperate situation than the plan's actual merit. Get some rest, Silas told Clara as the sky began to lighten in the east. Few hours until dawn. You'll need steady hands for what's coming. Like I can sleep knowing what we're about to do. Try anyway. That's an order from your husband. Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. You're bossy when you're planning to die. I'm bossy all the time. You just haven't noticed yet. The echo of her own words from yesterday. Was it only yesterday? Made something ache in Claire's chest. She looked at this scarred, damaged man who'd shown up expecting nothing and offering everything, and realized with sudden terrifying clarity that she didn't want him to die, didn't want to lose him now that she'd just found him. It wasn't love. They'd known each other less than a week, and love didn't grow that fast outside of fairy tales. But it was something. Partnership, maybe. Recognition. The sense that this person understood her in ways no one else had. Don't die, she said quietly. That's an order from your wife. Silas's expression softened. I'll do my best. Clara forced herself to lie down on the couch, knowing she wouldn't sleep but needing to at least rest her body. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about dawn, about gunfire, about watching Silas ride out knowing he might not ride back. Tried not to think about anything except breathing in and out, staying present, conserving what little strength remained. She must have dozed despite her certainty otherwise, because the next thing she knew, Silas was shaking her shoulder gently. It's time. Dawn was breaking cold and clear, the fog completely gone, leaving the landscape exposed and vulnerable. Clara rose stiffly, every muscle protesting. She checked her father's rifle, the familiar weight of it steadying her nerves. Around her, the surviving defenders were taking their positions. Danny and Peter in the house's upper windows, Sam near the water trough, Grimes and his remaining men spread through the property's perimeter. Clara would be in the tree line with two of the townsmen who'd proven decent shots during the first assault. "Remember," Silas said, addressing everyone, "you don't fire until you have clear shots at Crow or Vance. Not before. We get maybe one chance at this, and if we blow it early, we're all dead." "And if they just shoot you on sight?" one of the townsmen asked nervously. "Then you fire immediately and hope for the best. But I don't think they will. Crow's waited too long for this. He'll want to savor it." Silas checked his revolver one last time, then deliberately left it on the kitchen table. "Can't go under a white flag armed. That'd give him excuse to shoot me." Clara's stomach twisted watching him disarm, stripping away the one advantage that had kept him alive this long. He looked smaller without the gun, more vulnerable. Just a man with a death wish riding toward certain pain and probable death. "Silas," she said, not sure what she wanted to say, just needing him to look at her one more time before he left. He did, and something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or farewell, or the acknowledgement that neither of them was particularly good with words, but both understood the weight of what was about to happen. Then he was moving, catching up his horse, tying a strip of white cloth to a pole, mounting up despite the obvious pain from his shoulder wound. Clara ran to her position in the tree line, pressing herself against a thick oak that provided both cover and a stable rest for her rifle. The two townsmen with her, she still didn't know their names, had been too caught up in chaos to learn, settled in on either side, their breathing loud in the quiet morning. They didn't have to wait long. Crow's camp must have been close, because within 20 minutes of Silas riding out with that white flag visible from a distance, riders appeared on the northern horizon. Clara counted 15, fewer than she'd expected, which meant either Crow had lost more men than she'd thought in the first assault, or he'd sent some elsewhere. Neither option was comforting. Crow himself was easy to identify even at distance, that massive build, the way other riders deferred to him. Vance rode at his right hand, both men armed and clearly anticipating a trap despite the white flag. They approached slowly, deliberately, making Silas come to them rather than meeting in the middle. Strategic thinking that made Clara's anxiety spike higher. Through the rifle's sight, Clara could see Silas's face clearly, calm, focused, showing none of the pain or fear he had to be feeling. He reined up about 50 feet from Crow's position, close enough to talk, but far enough to maintain some distance. The white flag hung limp in the still morning air. "Crow, sir," Silas called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You've been looking for me. Here I am." Crow laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Silas Kane, been a long time. You look like hell." "You look worse." "Still got that smart mouth. Good. I was worried prison might have broken that out of you." Crow urged his horse forward a few steps. "But you didn't do prison, did you? You ran. Left your unit to burn while you saved your own skin." Clara's breath caught. "Prison? Unit? What was Crow talking about?" "That's not what happened," Silas said flatly. "But you know that already. You were there when the captain gave the order. When he told us to burn that town, execute anyone who resisted. I refused. You didn't. I followed orders. That's what soldiers do. You turned traitor, killed 3 of our own men trying to stop you, and ran. Been hunting you ever since." Crow's voice hardened. "All the death that's followed you, every person I've killed tracking you down, that's on your head. You could have faced justice years ago. Instead, you made me chase you across half the territory. Your version of justice involves burning towns full of innocent people. That's not justice. That's revenge. Call it what you want. Doesn't change the facts." Crow gestured at the farm behind Silas. "All these people here, they're going to die because of you. That pretty new wife of yours, she's going to die because you brought trouble to her door. You want to save them? Throw down your weapon. Oh, wait, you're not even armed. Smart. Shows you know how this ends." "I know exactly how this ends," Silas said quietly. "With you dead in the dirt." Crow's expression went cold. "Big talk from a man standing alone against 15 guns. Unless you think your friends hiding in those trees are going to save you." Clara's heart stopped. He knew. Crow knew about their positions. "Vance," Crow called without looking away from Silas. "Take 8 men. Sweep the tree line. Kill anyone you find." Everything happened too fast. Vance wheeled his horse, leading half of Crow's riders directly toward Clara's position. At the same time, gunfire erupted from the farm, Grimes and his men trying to provide covering fire. Crow's remaining riders scattered, returning fire while Crow himself drew on Silas. Clara aimed at Crow, squeezed the trigger, but her angle was wrong and the bullet went wide. Vance's men were almost on top of her position. The townsman to her left fired, dropped one rider, then took a bullet to the chest and fell backward without a sound. The other townsman was already running, panic overriding training. Clara fired at Vance, missed, fired again, and saw him jerk in the saddle, but not fall. Then horses were crashing through the underbrush around her, and she was running too, branches tearing at her clothes, her rifle clutched tight, knowing if she stopped moving, she was dead. Behind her, the battle had devolved into complete chaos. She risked a glance back and saw Silas grappling with Crow on the ground, both men unarmed but fighting with vicious intensity. Gunfire echoed from the farm as Grimes's men tried to hold against overwhelming numbers. And Vance was pursuing her through the trees, his face twisted with something beyond professional violence. He was enjoying this. Clara burst from the tree line onto open ground and realized her mistake immediately. No cover, nowhere to hide, and Vance clearing the trees behind her with his gun raised. She spun, bringing up her rifle, knowing she was too slow, knowing this was how it ended. The shot came from her left, and Vance jerked sideways, blood spraying from his neck. He fell from his horse, clutching at the wound, making horrible gurgling sounds. Clara looked toward the shot's origin and saw Danny Foster standing in the house's second-floor window, already working the bolt on his rifle to chamber another round. "Get down!" Danny screamed at her. Clara dropped flat as gunfire ripped through the space where she'd been standing. She crawled toward the nearest cover, an overturned wagon, and pressed herself against it, trying to catch her breath, trying to think past the adrenaline and terror flooding her system. Vance was down, choking on his own blood, his gun fallen several feet away. Clara could hear him dying, could hear his desperate attempts to breathe through a destroyed throat. Part of her, the part that had been raised to show mercy, even to suffering animals, wanted to end it quickly. But a harder part, the part that had been forged through her father's death and Brennan's threats, and every desperate day since, stayed where she was and let him suffer. He'd come to her home, tried to kill her people, enjoyed the violence. He'd earned this death. Clara forced herself to move, crawling toward the house while trying to track what was happening elsewhere. She could see the main battle still raging near the farm's center, riders and defenders trading fire at close range, several bodies on the ground from both sides. And in the middle of it all, Silas and Crow were still fighting, both men bleeding, both refusing to quit. She reached the porch and scrambled up, finding Sam Foster reloading with shaking hands. "Where's your rifle?" "Out of ammunition," he gasped. "I counted wrong. Thought I had more." "Then get a gun from someone who doesn't need it anymore." Clara's voice came out harder than she intended, but there was no time for gentle. She moved through the house toward the window where Danny was positioned and found him tracking Crow's riders with methodical precision, firing only when he had clear shots. "That was a hell of a shot on Vance," Clara told him. "Pa taught me to hunt elk at 300 yards. Man's an easier target." Danny's face was pale but focused. "We're losing, though. Grimes just went down. Peter's out of ammunition. We've maybe got 3 men still fighting on our side, and Crow's got at least 8 still mounted." Clara looked out the window and saw he was right. Their defense was collapsing. Marshal Grimes lay motionless near the barn's remains. Peter Foster was using his empty rifle as a club against a rider who'd closed to melee range. And in the center of everything, Silas and Crow were locked together, too close for anyone to intervene without hitting both. "We need to end this," Clara said. "Right now. Where's Silas's revolver?" "Kitchen table, where he left it." Clara ran for it, her exhausted legs nearly giving out on the stairs. She grabbed the gun, checked the load, 4 rounds left, and moved toward the front door. She had no plan except getting close enough to Crow to put a bullet in him and hoping that didn't require shooting through Silas to do it. Outside, the fight had shifted. Silas had managed to get on top of Crow, landing blows that should have broken bones, but the bigger man bucked hard and threw him off. Crow rolled to his feet, drawing a knife from his boot, and Clara saw how this was going to end. Silas was wounded, exhausted, fighting a man with fresh weapons and murder in his eyes. Clara raised the revolver, but the angle was wrong. Both men were moving too fast, too erratic, and she couldn't guarantee a shot that would hit Crow without hitting Silas. She started running toward them, closing the distance, knowing she was exposing herself to the remaining raiders, but unable to watch Silas die without trying to help. Crow lunged with the knife, and Silas barely twisted aside, the blade opening a line across his ribs instead of burying in his heart. Silas grabbed Crow's knife arm, and they went down again in a tangle of limbs and violence. Clara was maybe 20 feet away now, still closing, when one of Crow's remaining riders spotted her and turned his horse in her direction. She fired at him, missed, fired again, and caught him in the shoulder. He wheeled away, and Clara ran the last few steps to where Silas and Crow were still grappling. Up close, she could see how badly hurt Silas was. His shoulder wound had torn open, his ribs were bleeding, his face was a mass of bruises. But his eyes were still fierce, still fighting, still refusing to quit. "Get back," he gasped at Clara. "Too close!" Crow saw her then, and his expression shifted into something calculating and cruel. He stopped trying to stab Silas and instead wrenched the knife free, slashing toward Clara in a move designed to force Silas to choose. Protect himself or protect her. Silas chose her, throwing himself between Clara and the blade, taking another deep cut across his already wounded shoulder. He screamed, genuine agony breaking through his controlled facade, but didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed Crow's wrist and twisted hard, forcing the knife from the bigger man's grip. Clara didn't think. Just raised the revolver, pressed it against Crow's side below the ribs, and pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The shots were deafening this close. Crow's body jerked with each impact, his eyes going wide with shock and something that might have been respect. He fell backward off Silas, hitting the ground hard, blood spreading across the dirt beneath him. "Should have killed you years ago," Crow rasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "When I had the chance." "Yeah," Silas said quietly, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "You should have." Crow tried to say something else, but then his eyes went glassy and still, and whatever words he'd been reaching for died with him. The remaining raiders saw their leader fall, and exactly as Silas had predicted, broke. They scattered in different directions, abandoning the fight, abandoning their dead, fleeing with the kind of panic speed that came from having your world suddenly shift beneath you. Within minutes, the farm was silent except for the moans of wounded men and the crackle of dying fires. Clara dropped to her knees beside Silas, the revolver falling from her numb fingers. "You're bleeding again. Your shoulder—" "I've had worse." But his voice was weak, and his face had gone gray in a way that terrified her. "Danny!" Clara screamed. "I need help! Medical supplies!" The next hours blurred together into a nightmare of triage and desperate medical care. Danny Foster, who apparently had some basic field experience from hunting accidents, helped Clara restitch Silas's torn shoulder while Sam tried to stabilize the other wounded. Peter had taken a hard blow to the head and was barely conscious. Marshall Grimes, who Clara had thought dead, turned out to be alive but badly wounded, bullet through the lung, drowning in his own blood, probably not going to survive the night. 2 more townsmen were dead, their bodies added to the growing collection near the barn. The sun climbed toward noon, and Clara worked mechanically, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind existed somewhere far away. She'd killed a man, shot him 3 times at point-blank range, and watched him die. The weight of that sat in her chest like a stone, but she couldn't afford to examine it yet. Too much else needed doing. By afternoon, the immediate crisis had stabilized into grim reality. 5 men dead total from their side, including Grimes, who'd finally stopped breathing around 3 o'clock, despite their best efforts. 7 wounded ranging from serious to critical. Crow's gang had left behind 11 bodies, including Vance and Crow himself. The math was brutal. They'd won, but the cost made victory feel hollow. Silas had passed out from blood loss sometime during the afternoon, and Clara sat beside his bed, her bed. She'd insisted on moving him to the house, watching him breathe and trying not to think about how close she'd come to losing him. How close they'd all come to dying because one man's past had caught up to him and dragged everyone nearby into violence. "He saved us, you know." Clara looked up to find Danny Foster standing in the doorway, his shirt stained with other people's blood, exhaustion written across his young face. "What?" "Your husband. He saved us. Could have run when Crow showed up, led him away, kept himself safe. But he stayed, fought beside us, taught us how to fight back. My brothers and I, we'd be dead right now if not for him." Probably everyone here would be. He also brought the danger that almost killed you, Clara said quietly. No, Crow brought that. Silas just gave us a chance to survive it. Danny moved into the room, looking down at Silas's unconscious form. Pa used to say you can judge a man by what he does when everything's falling apart. When there's no reward for doing right, just the choice itself. By that measure, your husband's one of the best men I've ever met. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. Danny left her alone with her thoughts and the steady sound of Silas breathing. Outside, people were cleaning up the aftermath, burying the dead, tending the wounded, trying to salvage what they could from the destruction. The farm was a disaster, the barn completely gone, the chicken coop destroyed again, fences shattered, blood soaked into the ground that would take seasons to wash away. But they'd held. Against overwhelming odds, against professional killers, they'd stood their ground and survived. It didn't feel like victory, but maybe that was the point. Maybe real victory never felt triumphant. Maybe it just felt like surviving another day with the people you'd chosen to stand beside. Clara reached out and took Silas's hand, feeling his pulse steady beneath her fingers. He'd kept his word to Thomas. Stayed when running would have been easier. Fought when surrender would have been safer. Nearly died protecting people who'd been strangers less than a week ago. And somehow, in the process, he'd become something more to Clara than just the dangerous man who'd stepped off that train. "Don't you dare die on me now," she whispered. "Not after everything. You hear me, Silas Kane? You don't get to sacrifice yourself and leave me alone to deal with this mess. You promised me a marriage in name only, and I'm holding you to that. So you wake up, you recover, and then we figure out what comes next, together." She wasn't sure if he heard her, but his hand tightened slightly around hers, and Clara chose to believe that meant he was fighting to keep the promise. Outside, the sound of hammering drifted through the window, someone repairing what could be salvaged, refusing to let the damage stand as Crow's final mark on their town. Clara sat with Silas through the night, dozing in the chair beside his bed, jerking awake at every change in his breathing. Twice he started fevering, his body fighting infection from wounds that had been stitched in haste with imperfect tools. Each time, Clara bathed his face with cool water and prayed to nothing in particular that he'd survive. By the third morning after the battle, Silas finally opened his eyes and stayed conscious long enough to speak. "You look terrible," he rasped. "You look worse." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back hard. "You've been out for 2 days. I was starting to think you wouldn't wake up. Takes more than Crow to kill me." Silas tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and settled back down. "What happened? After Crow's dead. Vance is dead. The remaining men scattered and haven't been seen since. We lost 5 people, including Marshall Grimes. 7 more wounded, but they'll probably survive." Clara's voice stayed flat, reciting facts because feeling them was too much. "The farm's a disaster. Barn's completely gone, half the property's destroyed, and I have no idea how we're going to rebuild." "We'll figure it out." "Will we?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Because right now, I don't see how. Even if we repair the damage, the banknotes still due. Brennan's probably already filing his claim. And I just killed a man, Silas. Shot him 3 times and watched him die, and I don't know how to live with that." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "The first one's always the hardest. You keep waiting for guilt or horror, or something that tells you you're still human. Sometimes it comes. Sometimes it doesn't. Either way, you wake up the next day and keep going because that's what survival looks like." "I don't want to just survive. I want to actually live, build something real. But everything I touch turns to ash." "That's not true." "Isn't it? My father built this farm, and it killed him. I married you, and violence followed. Everyone who stands near me ends up bleeding or dead." Clara's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "Maybe Brennan was right. Maybe I am damaged goods. Maybe the smart thing is to sell, leave, start over somewhere no one knows me." "You don't believe that." "I don't know what I believe anymore." Silas reached for her hand with obvious effort, his grip weak but steady. "Look at me." When Clara met his eyes, he continued. "You stood against Crow when running would have been easier. You fought for your home when surrendering would have been safer. You saved my life when leaving me would have been smarter. That's not damage, that's strength. The kind most people never find because they never get tested hard enough to need it. Strength doesn't pay banknotes. No, but it keeps you standing long enough to find a way. Silas closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion still weighing on him. Give me a week to heal enough to move properly. Then we tackle the bank, Brennan. All of it. Together. Clara wanted to argue that a week wouldn't change their impossible situation, but Silas had already fallen back asleep, his hand still holding hers loosely. She sat there watching him breathe and tried to find hope in the wreckage around her. The town came to help rebuild. It started small, Danny Foster showing up with salvaged lumber and his brothers to assist with construction. Then others arrived, people who'd lost family in the fight or who'd simply been moved by the stand Clara and Silas had made. They worked in shifts, raising new walls where the barn had stood, repairing fences, clearing debris. Nobody talked much. They just worked, expressing through action what words couldn't capture. Gratitude, maybe, or solidarity, or the simple recognition that some fights mattered enough to see through to the end. Walter Brennan showed up on the fourth day, riding onto the property with his usual entitlement, clearly expecting to find Clara broken and ready to surrender. Instead, he found 30 people working together, rebuilding with determined efficiency. His expression soured when he saw the progress. "Clara," he called out, dismounting near where she was directing lumber placement. "Heard about your trouble with Crow. Terrible business. But it doesn't change your financial situation. Banknotes still do, and I don't see how you're going to pay it standing in the middle of a construction site." "Then you're not looking close enough." Clara didn't stop working, just gestured at the people around her. Turns out when you fight for something worth protecting, others notice. The town's taken up a collection. We've raised almost $100 so far. Brennan's face darkened. "That's still not enough." "No, but it's a start. And we've got 3 weeks until the note's due. Plenty of time to find the rest." "You're delusional if you think—" "She's not alone anymore, Brennan." Silas's voice cut across the property, and Clara turned to see him standing in the house's doorway, supported by a makeshift crutch, but upright. He looked terrible, pale, thin, moving with obvious pain, but his eyes were sharp and his gun was back on his hip. Whatever pressure you're planning to apply, whatever threats you're building up to, you're going to want to reconsider. Brennan's hand drifted toward his own weapon, but he caught himself, recognizing the calculation was different now. Silas Kane might be wounded, but he was still the man who'd killed Elias Crow, still dangerous in ways Brennan couldn't match. "This isn't over," Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, it is." Clara stepped forward, putting herself between Brennan and the workers. "You've been circling this property like a vulture since my father died, waiting for me to fail so you could swoop in cheap. But I'm not failing. This farm's going to survive, and when it does, you're going to be the man who bet against his neighbors and lost. Now get off my land before I have my husband remove you." Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but the crowd of workers had stopped what they were doing and turned to watch, their expressions ranging from hostile to openly threatening. He was outnumbered and outmatched, and he knew it. With a final glare, he mounted his horse and rode off, his back rigid with impotent rage. "That felt good," Clara admitted to Silas once Brennan was out of sight. "He'll be back. Men like that don't quit easy. Let him come. Next time I'll be ready." Clara moved to help Silas back inside, concerned by how much the brief confrontation had cost him. "You shouldn't be up. You're still healing." "Couldn't let you face him alone." "I wasn't alone. There were 30 people here." "Still." Silas settled back onto the bed with a pained exhale. "Wanted him to see we're a united front, that pushing you means dealing with both of us." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, studying this complicated man who'd entered her life like a storm and somehow become essential to it. "Why do you do that? Risk yourself when you're already hurt? You could have let me handle Brennan." "Because that's what partners do. They stand together even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Silas met her eyes. "This marriage might have started as a transaction, but it's become something else. At least for me." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want an annulment when this is over. I'm saying somewhere between the train platform and now, you became someone I'd choose, someone I want to build a life with, if you'll have me." Silas's scarred face held genuine vulnerability. "I know I'm not what you signed up for. I'm damaged and dangerous, and I bring trouble everywhere I go. But I'd try to be better, for you, if you want that. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Clara thought about Thomas's gentle letters, about the safe partnership she'd imagined with a man she'd never met. Then she thought about Silas, scarred, violent, haunted Silas, who'd kept his word at every turn, who'd nearly died protecting her in her home, who looked at her like she was worth fighting for. "I don't want you to be better," Clara said quietly. "I want you to be you. The man who showed up when I needed someone, who taught me to fight instead of hide, who treats me like an equal instead of something fragile." She took his hand. "Yes, I want that. Want you. Want this. Whatever it becomes." Silas's expression shifted into something Clara had never seen before. Relief mixed with wonder, like he'd expected rejection and couldn't quite believe the alternative. "You're sure? Because there's no going back from this. You tie yourself to me permanently, you're accepting everything that comes with it. I already shot a man standing beside you. Pretty sure I'm committed at this point." That pulled a rough laugh from him, immediately followed by a wince as the movement jarred his injuries. "Fair point." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. The marriage of convenience had become something real, messy and complicated and forged through violence, but real nonetheless. Not the fairy tale Clara had once imagined, but something stronger, something earned. Over the following weeks, the farm slowly took shape again. The new barn wasn't as large as the old one, but it was solid and weatherproof. The fences went up section by section. The chicken coop got rebuilt with better materials and actual security this time. People brought donations, seeds for spring planting, a few chickens to rebuild the flock, tools to replace what had been destroyed. The Foster brothers stayed on to help, having nowhere else to go and apparently adopting the farm as their new home. "We're building a community here," Danny observed one evening as they all sat around Clara's kitchen table sharing dinner. "Not just a farm, something bigger." "That happens sometimes," Silas said. His shoulder finally healed enough to work without visible pain. "Crisis forces people together, and some of them decide they like it better than being alone." "Pa would have liked that," Sam said quietly. "He always said the problem with frontier life was everyone trying to make it on their own. Said we needed each other more than we admitted." "Your father was a smart man," Clara told him. "I'm sorry Crow took him from you. He died trying to protect someone. That's how he would have wanted it." Danny's voice was steady, the grief still there but no longer overwhelming. "And we're honoring that by helping you hold on to something worth protecting." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. These boys had lost everything and still found it in themselves to give what little they had left. That said something about humanity that all the violence and death couldn't erase, that people could choose kindness even after experiencing cruelty, could build even after watching destruction. The banknote deadline approached with terrifying speed. Despite the town's collections and Clara's best efforts to sell everything non-essential, they were still $40 short. $40 that might as well have been $400 for all Clara's ability to produce it. "I can take a job," Silas offered for the 10th time. "There's work in the mining camps, dangerous stuff that pays well. Give me a week, I can make the difference." "No." Clara's refusal was automatic. She'd watched Silas push himself through recovery, working too hard too fast because rest felt like failure to him. The last thing he needed was more danger. "We'll find another way. Clara, we're out of options. Unless you want to lose the farm, there might be one more option." Danny Foster had been quiet during this conversation, but now he spoke up hesitantly. "Before Pa died, he told me about money he'd hidden. Insurance against hard times, he called it. Said if anything happened to him, we should use it to start over." Peter and Sam exchanged glances. "Danny, that money's for us, for our future." "What future?" Danny's voice was gentle but firm. "We're living here now, working this land. Clara and Silas took us in when we had nothing, taught us to fight back instead of run. As far as I'm concerned, this is our family now, and families help each other." "How much are we talking about?" Silas asked carefully. $60? More than enough to cover what you need." Clara shook her head immediately. "I can't take your inheritance, that's yours." "It's ours to give," Peter interrupted. "Danny's right. You gave us a home when we had none. Let us help save it." The argument went back and forth for an hour, Clara insisting she couldn't accept charity, the brothers insisting it wasn't charity, but investment in their shared future. Finally, Silas cut through the debate with characteristic bluntness. Take the money, Clara. Pay the bank. Then we all work together to build this place into something sustainable. The boys get a home, we keep the farm, everyone wins. And if we can't pay them back, then we don't. We just give them a share of the farm officially, make them partners in this. Silas looked at the Foster brothers. That work for you three? They nodded in unison, and Clara felt herself outvoted by people who somehow cared about her enough to tie their futures to hers. It was humbling and terrifying and overwhelming all at once. All right, she said finally, but we do this legally. Draw up papers making you all part owners, equal stakes. This stops being just mine and becomes ours. The banknote got paid with 2 days to spare, Clara walking into the county clerk's office with cash in hand and satisfaction burning in her chest. The clerk, an older man who'd clearly expected her to default, actually looked disappointed as he marked the debt satisfied and handed over the deed free and clear. Congratulations, Mrs. Kane, he said, making her married name sound like an insult. Though I expect you'll be back here eventually, land like that's hard to keep profitable. Then I guess we'll work harder. Clara took the deed and walked out with her head high, refusing to let his bitterness touch her victory. Walter Brennan made one final play a week later, showing up with a lawyer and documents claiming irregularities in her father's original land claim. But the Foster brothers had done their research, finding county records that proved John Whitmore's claim had been properly filed and maintained. Brennan's lawyer took one look at the documentation, told his client the case was unwinnable, and advised immediate withdrawal. Brennan left without a word, but Clara caught his expression as he rode away. Not just anger, but something that might have been grudging respect. She'd beaten him at every turn, refused to be intimidated or bought out, and survived long enough to make her stand permanent. In a territory where strength was currency, that meant something. Winter came down hard that year, snow piling up until the farm looked like something from a childhood story. Pristine and white and deceptively peaceful. They'd stockpiled enough supplies to last until spring, and the animals were sheltered properly for the first time in years. Around the fire at night, the 6 of them, Clara, Silas, and the 3 Foster brothers, would share stories or play cards or just sit in comfortable silence, bound together by shared trauma and shared survival. You ever think about what comes next? Peter asked one evening while wind howled outside. After winter? After we've rebuilt everything? We keep building, Clara said. Expand the farm, maybe take on more hands. Turn this into something sustainable long-term. I was thinking we could start a proper ranch, Danny added. Run cattle in addition to crops. Diversify so we're not dependent on one income source. That takes capital we don't have, Silas pointed out, but his tone suggested he was calculating possibilities rather than dismissing them. So we save. Build slowly. Do it right instead of fast. Clara looked around at the faces gathered in lamplight. Young faces mostly, but hardened by experience. Marked by loss, but still capable of hope. We've got time, and we've got each other. That counts for more than money. They talked late into the night, planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Clara watched Silas contribute ideas with quiet enthusiasm, his earlier fatalism replaced by something resembling optimism. It was a good look on him, she decided. Made the scars seem less like damage and more like evidence of survival. One night in late January, Clara woke to find Silas's side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch, despite the cold, staring out at snow-covered fields that gleamed silver under a full moon. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him. "Can't sleep?" she asked, thinking. Silas didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the landscape. About Thomas. About how none of this would exist without him. He brought us together in a way. Even dying, he was trying to take care of people. You miss him. Every day. He was a better man than I'll ever be. Kinder. More patient. You would have been happy with him. Maybe. Clara took Silas's hand. But I'm happy with you. Different kind of happy, but real. Even knowing what it cost, the people who died, the violence you had to commit, even knowing that. Clara spoke with certainty born from months of reflection. Because here's what I learned from all of this. You don't get to choose your battles. Life brings them to you whether you're ready or not. The only choice you get is whether you face them alone or find people to stand beside. I could have married a gentle farmer and still ended up fighting Brennan alone. probably losing everything. Instead, I got you. Got the Foster brothers. Got a community willing to defend each other. That's worth the cost. Silas was quiet for a long moment. I used to think I was cursed, that everyone around me was doomed because of my past. But maybe it's not about the past. Maybe it's about what you do with the present. That's almost optimistic coming from you. Don't get used to it. But Silas was smiling slightly, his scarred face relaxed in a way Clara rarely saw. I'm still terrible at this, at being a husband, at belonging somewhere. I'll probably mess it up. Then you'll mess it up and we'll figure it out together. Clara leaned against him, sharing warmth. That's what partnership means. Not being perfect, just being present. They stood together watching the moonlight on snow, two damaged people who'd found something like peace in the aftermath of violence. It wasn't the ending Clara had imagined when she'd waited on that train platform for a man who'd never arrive. But it was real. It was earned. And somewhere in the brutality and loss, they'd built something worth keeping. Spring came eventually, the way it always does. The snow melted, revealing ground that had been soaked with blood just months earlier, but was now ready for planting. They worked the land together, all 6 of them, turning soil, planting seeds, building on foundations that had been forged through fire. Clara stood at the property's edge one morning in early April, watching the sun rise over fields that were finally, permanently, hers. Beside her, Silas worked on repairing a fence post, his movements efficient and practiced. The Foster brothers were near the barn, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to construct a new equipment shed. Everything was imperfect, messy, still bearing scars from the violence that had swept through. But it was alive, growing, becoming something new. You look thoughtful, Silas observed, joining her with dirt on his hands and satisfaction in his eyes. Just thinking about how much has changed, how different everything is from what I expected. Regret any of it? Clara considered the question honestly. She thought about her father's death, about the desperation that had led her to marry a stranger, about the violence and fear and impossible choices. Thought about the people who died defending this place, about the weight of having killed someone, about scars both visible and not that would never fully heal. No, she said finally, I don't regret it, because here's what I've learned. Life doesn't give you the story you want. It gives you the story you need to become who you're supposed to be. I thought I needed safety and gentleness. Turns out I needed to learn I was stronger than I believed, that I could stand and fight and survive things that should have broken me. You taught me that. This place taught me that. Pretty sure you taught yourself. I just provided the circumstances. Maybe, but you stayed when leaving would have been easier. That matters. Silas pulled her close, and Clara let herself lean into him, comfortable in a way she'd never imagined being with anyone. They stood together watching their land wake up to spring, 2 people who'd survived everything that should have destroyed them and come out the other side still standing. In the end, that was the lesson Clara took from the entire nightmare, that strength wasn't about never being hurt or scared or broken. It was about getting back up anyway, about finding people worth fighting beside and causes worth bleeding for, about choosing to build even when destruction seemed easier, to hope even when despair felt justified, to love even when loss seemed inevitable. The farm would never be perfect. They'd always be working to maintain it, fighting against weather and economics and whatever other challenges the territory threw at them. But it was theirs, built by their hands, defended with their blood, earned through choices both terrible and necessary. And somewhere in the process of surviving together, they'd become something neither of them had expected to be. A family. Not bound by blood, but by shared battle, by choosing each other when they could have chosen to walk away, by standing together when standing alone would have been fatal. Clara looked at Silas, at the man who'd arrived expecting to fulfill a dying promise, and instead found a reason to stay. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For keeping your word to Thomas. For not running when things got hard. For showing me what partnership actually looks like. Thank you for not shooting me in my sleep when you had the chance. Clara laughed, the sound genuine and free. Day's not over yet. That's true. Keep me honest then. Always. They went back to work, hands in the dirt, building toward a future neither had planned, but both had earned. And if the road ahead was uncertain, if danger still lurked at the edges waiting for another chance, They'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together, imperfect, scarred, but standing. Because that was the truth Clara had learned through blood and fire and desperate choices made in the dark. You didn't have to be undamaged to be strong. You didn't have to have all the answers to move forward. You just had to keep choosing to stand up, to fight for what mattered, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today, even when today was brutal. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone willing to stand beside you while you figured it all out. Someone who saw your damage and didn't flinch. Someone who matched your strength instead of trying to diminish it. Someone who understood that love built in violence and hardship was different from love built in peace, but no less real for the difference. Clara had gone to that train platform looking for security. She'd found something better, a partner who challenged her to be stronger, braver, more herself than she'd ever been allowed to be. It wasn't the fairy tale, but it was true. And in a world where truth was hard-won and survival was never guaranteed, that was more than enough. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth that had been frozen for months. New life pushed up through old scars. And in a small homestead in Dustfall Creek, 6 people who'd survived the unsurvivable got back to the work of living. One day, one choice, one act of stubborn hope at a time.